Today, we are joined with my wife, Jenny, and this is Marriage on the Line Lifeline. All marriages, even the really good ones, need mending. The routine of jobs, kids, chores, and other commitments can overshadow romance and passion with any husband and wife. As a result, couples can feel disillusioned or even alone. That is why my wife and I have created this marriage series, a platform for husbands and wives to come on and share what they do to be successful. Welcome to our show, Jenny.
Hi.
So today, what are we going to talk about?
We are just going to talk about marriage.
Yes, marriage. Now more than ever, couples are reaching out because they have lost hope in their marriage. And it's awful to say that because the marriage is the dynamic that creates the whole world. I mean, everything stands and based upon marriage. Carl Zimmerman wrote in a report, from 1942 saying that during the atomistic age, which means the falling apart, that marriages were the ones that held these great societies together, whether it be the Phoenicians, the Romans, whatever. Okay. And now in the United States, we're starting to see the fall or dissolving of the marriage unit. So that's why it's so important to handle these issues. And that's why we've created this platform. So what's your take on it, babe?
Well, I definitely think that, like you said, marriage is a foundation for security for families, for children. And ultimately, children are being raised in healthy families or not healthy families. And that really contributes to the overall state of society. So it is really important to know that you're not alone if you are struggling in your marriage. We've been there, but we've overcome a lot of things, and we're still learning to overcome and learning how to do marriage God's way, the right way, and to really flourish in marriage. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times too, people get married with the aspirations that I fell in love with this person, and it's easy to fall out of love with this person as well. They don't go into it with the mindset that, hey, whatever it takes, I'm going to make this to succeed. What do you think?
I think that there is definitely a huge amount of people out there, and I don't know why this is, that think, oh, if I met the right person, I don't need to do any work. It should just work well. And then, like, with everything that is worth working towards, like if you have this great career, you still have to work at that career. You don't just get the career and then sit back and relax. You'll lose your job that way, right?
Yeah.
Well, the same principles work with marriage. Like, you need to continue to work at marriage to have a great marriage. It's not something where it's like, oh, I got the check. No, my job is done. Now I just need to chill. Or same thing with the woman, like, oh, I got the man that I wanted. Now I don't ever need to do my makeup or,
Clean the house.
or, I'm going to live in sweats all day, and which is cool. I mean, if you need to live in sweats, that's fine. Your man should love you the way you are, but you should also be trying too,
Yeah, exactly. Never stop dating your spouse.
Right.
I heard a great pastor that we listened to, Pastor Jurgen. He said, how you catch a thing is how you keep a thing. And I agree with that 100% wholeheartedly, because it's true. Men tend to marry the girl, right? We get the girl, we go to work, we start going into this provider protector mode, and we start doing that. And somehow along the way, we forget why we're doing it, who we're doing it for. And then our families start getting pushed off to the side, correct?
Yeah, I kind of wonder where that mindset comes from, though, because you see that a lot in the family dynamic where, like, the man pursues the woman, is super excited to receive her as his wife, and then kind of becomes complacent and almost develops this thinking as if, oh, well, we're married, so she's never going to leave. It doesn't matter how hard we go through stuff or whatever, better for worse, she's never going to leave me. Where does that thinking kind of come from? Because sometimes I feel like a lot of women are talking about what they need from their man, and they try to address it with their man, but then their man thinks it's like nagging, and
Mm,
you know what I'm saying?
yes.
Like, but then there's also like a complacency from the man, like, oh, well, we're married and you're never going to leave me, but yet you don't want to work on the marriage. So what happens in a man's thinking?
Well, from my perspective, because I went through this, I think it was a generational issue to where, like, my parents, they have been married for 50 some years, 50, well, now 52 years now, right? They
Hmm.
just celebrated in December. And they got married really young. My mom had twins at the age of 16. And, them growing up together in this relationship, no matter how hard it got, no matter how, um, what today's society would call violent, you know what I mean? It got pretty rough growing up and in their marriage and stuff like that. And I think growing up and seeing that and seeing all the stuff that my mom went through and stuck through it, even to the point where they lost their youngest child in 2020, which is my younger brother, and then seeing them stick together now, that's how I grew up. That's what I saw. That was the model for me in our marriage is no matter what, how hard it is, what you do, you stick with your spouse.
Hmm.
You never leave them. And that's the mindset I went into when I married you. No matter how hard it got, no matter how bad it got, I was going to be there for you and stick with this and make this sucker work until the wheels fell off. That's the mindset I had. But I think to answer your question, I think it's based upon how you saw and related to marriage in your own family dynamic. What do you think?
Like growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm on the polar opposite where like grew up in a household with divorced parents and stuff like that. So leaving was kind of
The other
what
option.
I learned was an option to the problem.
Instead of dealing with the problem,
Right.
right?
Which isn't an option to fixing the problems because you're just going to repeat those same issues in the next relationship. And it's interesting because when you get into a relational dynamic,
Hmm.
that's where growth happens. Yes, you can heal when you get outside of like a relationship, you can heal, but real healing comes when I think we have to learn how to deal with each other relationally. So at some point, you're going to have to face your triggers
Hmm.
and deal with what is really causing the triggers. Like just because you trigger me doesn't mean that you're toxic. It just means that there's something in me that needs to be fixed.
Exactly. And I think more couples need to understand that because yeah, you're going to have this tension in between you, right? And in a perfect marriage, the way God designed it to be, you're going to have those tensions to bring out to kind of draw out our flaws that need worked on, correct?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So like say for instance, you're triggering me, right? You're doing something that I recognize that I
Mhm.
don't like.
Mhm.
Okay? A lot of times when we see that in other people, it's because we ourselves don't like that about ourselves, and that's how we recognize it in
Mhm.
other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it makes us uncomfortable because I don't like it. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? It's like then I got to step back and be like, okay, well, what is it that she's doing that I do that I'm recognizing this?
Mhm.
You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And then it goes back to self instead of finger pointing. I think a lot of couples these days like to point the finger instead
Mhm.
of pointing the finger back at themselves and be like, okay, well, what is it that I'm doing that I'm creating this?
Mhm. I agree, but it definitely this goes for couples and marriages where you're fighting fair and it's a safe environment
Mm,
too, because there are a lot of toxic bad behaviors that
mhm.
can be taking place in the marriage, and sometimes people think it's blaming, but really it's holding somebody accountable.
Can you elaborate more on that? Because I know exactly where you're going, but for our listeners, can you elaborate a little bit more about that as far as like give examples of toxic behaviors?
Um, so okay. If I'm out doing something that's not good, I don't know, for the relationship and or it's triggered you or something like that, and
Mhm.
then uh you come to me and you're like, I don't like that. but then I deflect and I flip it around and I'm like, "What are you talking about? You're blaming me, blah, 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 all this stuff. I don't like what you're saying. It's all your fault," rather than taking responsibility for the wrong that I caused and the hurt that I caused you.
Hmm.
That's not okay. Like, say, for instance, if you're in a situation where one person has an addiction issue
Hmm.
and you go to that person and you say, "Hey, this is going too far.
Hmm.
It needs to stop." Then that person could possibly the person that has an addiction issue could possibly feel attacked and then turn things on you and not hear you, not listen to you, not understand how they're destroying the relationship.
I think in that aspect, one of like just for me again, when you came to me and you approached me with certain things that I was doing, whether it be an addiction to pornography or whatever, right?
Mhm,
I think when you came to me with that, I think it was a lot of it was rooted in shame. For one, I didn't
mhm,
like what I was doing, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be hiding it.
mhm,
And number two, the feeling of being transported back to being a child and getting caught doing something wrong.
mhm, mhm,
You know what I mean? So I think that's why when people feel that shame, they react in a way that's what you called not safe.
mhm,
You know, so I think as couples we need to recognize that that's probably a possibility that they're going to react like that, especially being caught red-handed.
mhm,
You know, I know for me, a lot of times I reacted probably in a response that wasn't safe for you. I'm like, and then deflecting, pointing blame. Well, you do this or you did this or whatever. You know
mhm,
what I'm saying?
to justify
To
it.
justify it. And I think that's rooted in shame,
Mhm.
you know?
I understand that, and I think that we definitely need to go to people in a safe way
Hmm.
and point out and help people grow, but also I do know, like, with your situation,
Hmm.
where you're dealing with addiction, you just couldn't hear me,
No.
and I think if somebody is going to their spouse over and over and over and is saying, "Hey, what you're doing is really hurting me. It's really hurting the relationship," but that spouse isn't able to change their behavior or acknowledge it, they might be dealing with an addiction.
Hmm. And an addiction could be anything. Like I stopped drinking 15 years ago and I stopped chewing 13 years ago. I thought I had handled that vice and that addiction just transferred into something else. For me, it was a hobby that I used to do. And that hobby became more important than my own family. I put that first, which in a sense, guys, if you're listening right now, what happens when you do that, you're telling your spouse that they are less important than your hobby. I know in that mindset while you're doing it, whether it be golf, whether it be working out, whatever, it may even being a workaholic, you don't think of that because you're always thinking of, okay, I'm doing this for this. This is for my happiness. Or if you're a workaholic, I'm getting this overtime to provide for a better life for my family. You know, you guys don't really see the damage that you're causing or the insecurity that you're causing in your wife when you're doing it, and that's part of that addiction. It's very seductive, don't you say?
Well, it is addictions are very seductive,
Mhm.
definitely, and then Dr. Stephen Poulter said whenever somebody's kinda dealing with an addiction, it's a very narcissistic type of trait. Not
Mhm.
necessarily saying the person themselves is a narcissist, but that it's very self-oriented, basically, right?
Yeah, because you're feeding yourself, your
Right.
needs, your ego, I guess, right?
You're trying to self-soothe
Mhm.
whatever's happening in your life, and, it doesn't really matter how you hurt anybody else or take from anybody else in order to fulfill yourself. But if a person is trying to come to their spouse that is dealing with addiction, what's the best way to approach them for that person to listen, for that person to want to change?
I think the best way to approach anybody in that kind of situation is to have a level of empathy and approach it the way you would wanna be approached.
But if a person people get wrapped up in their addictions, they don't care about what's happening
Mhm.
anywhere else, you know what I mean? As long as they feed their addiction. So how do you come to that person and you say, "This needs to stop?" Do you put down boundaries and say, "Hey, if you don't stop, I'm leaving?"
Yes, absolutely. I think that boundaries tough love, right?
Mhm.
Tough love. It's no different than the mother who keeps giving her child $20, right, to feed their smack addiction.
Mhm.
Okay. Now you say you're doing it because you love them and you don't want your little hito per se
Mhm.
to 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 be suffering, but in a sense, you're not helping them. You're just prolonging that agony. You're prolonging that pain. You're keeping them trapped.
Mhm.
So I look at it that way with addictions. So yeah, absolutely. I think you need to pull that band-aid off and put down that tough love, but approach it in a level of empathy as well. You know what I mean?
Right.
Enough is enough. When it's starting to dissolve the family and it's starting to affect the family,
Mhm.
and you see there's no reaching that person, that they are completely out of it, then you need to go to a drastic step, which is, hey, me or your addiction.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that was where I messed up. I was
Mhm,
always like, you know, you need to cut back on this
mhm,
because I didn't want to be like, it's me or the addiction.
mhm.
You know what I mean?
Well, I think too, though, like religion has really done a number on that too. Because I know for you, you felt like you didn't want to do that because then you'd be like, got to be. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What did you feel about that? you know?
um, I just felt like I didn't want to take something from you that you enjoyed because
hmm
it wasn't like a drug. Do
hmm
you know what I'm saying?
hmm
So I didn't want to remove something out of your life that you enjoyed. And also in my thinking, it was always like, well, he needs to choose on his own. Does he
hmm
love me or does he love this thing more than me?
hmm
And I think that's where I went wrong. Like, if I really valued the relationship, and honestly, if I really valued you,
hmm
I wouldn't placate you. I would say, you know what, I care about you too much to
hmm
see you continue to dissolve our family like this.
hmm
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Can you elaborate a little bit more for our listeners what about placation is?
Well, placating, which I've gotten to have a better understanding about this,
hmm
something I didn't really understand or knew that I did, uh, because I was a people pleaser, but I didn't really understand what that meant. Like, I knew that I really cared what people thought about me,
hmm
but it wasn't until I read The Shame Factor by Dr. Stephen Poulter, uh, about what codependency, placating, and people pleasing really is. So basically, it meant that I would just go along with whatever you wanted
hmm
so that way you would like me.
Mm.
So if you wanted tacos and I wanted Chinese food, I'd be like, yeah, let's do tacos instead of saying, you know what, I really want Chinese food. I don't want tacos again, you know?
Mhm.
Uh, so placating is where you're rejecting yourself in order to make somebody else happy, trying to control the situation
Mhm.
so that way the outcome comes in your favor.
So it's a form of
It's
manipulation.
a form of manipulation
Mhm.
in a very roundabout, non in your face type of manner. But
Mhm.
what happens to a person that placates is they become very resentful. Very resentful.
Mhm.
I do all this stuff for you, even though you've never asked me to do those things.
Mhm.
I do all these things for you. You know, I respect you. I do this, blah, 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 all this stuff. And you don't do anything for me. You don't mind read what I need, what my needs are.
Mhm.
And so now I'm resentful and unforgiving and hating you because really the problem is with me.
Mhm.
I'm not saying,
You're not voicing out your pain, right?
yeah, I'm not
And what you
voicing
need.
voicing out what I really want.
Mhm.
I'm placating to what you want.
Mhm.
So instead of saying, you know what, I don't like that. I want this,
Mhm.
which causes momentary chaos in the relationship, but ultimately both people will be happier because even the person that you're placating to starts to kind of resent you.
Mhm. No, and I see that too, because like in our relationship, you placated like crazy with me, and but unbeknownst to me, I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. You know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
just kept going with it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And then when you hit me upside the head, because like you said, you talked about bitterness and resentment building up. I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you're bitter? What do you mean you didn't like this house? What do you mean you didn't want to live out here in the country and have all these animals? What are you talking about? You know what I mean? Even though you had voiced those many a times, but you placated, you never put your foot down and said,
Right.
hey, I'm a part of this marriage too,
Yeah.
you know. Um, how many women are in that position right now, or even men?
I'm sure tons of men, tons of women are. Like, there's
Mhm.
that saying, I don't agree with it, "Happy wife, happy life."
No,
I don't agree with it. Uh,
that's a form of placation.
yeah, it's totally just training men to placate their wives, and vice versa, you
Mhm.
know what I mean? But I definitely think the big problem was that I would voice out what I wanted, but I wouldn't put my foot down and I wouldn't hold the boundary.
Mhm.
So then it became nagging.
Oh, yes. Yes. There's a proverb that talks about how it's better to sit outside on the roof on the corner of your house in the rain than have to deal with a woman who is nagging.
Mhm. And I think it becomes nagging because you're not putting boundaries. You're saying what you want,
Mhm.
but you're not holding that with a boundary. So you're saying, "Hey, can you put the trash out?"
Mhm.
And then you don't really do anything to enforce it. Or, "Hey, honey, I need help with the kids." But then there's no enforcement. You just go and you do it yourself, and then you're exhausted
Mhm.
and, like, bugged because this person isn't jumping to help you, you know what I mean? Where when you what you should do is say, "You know what? I need help with the kids right now. I
Yes.
need you to stop what you're doing and help me now." There
Mhm.
kinda needs to be some very clear communication.
Mhm.
For one, say what you want, don't beat around the bush, and be straightforward about it.
Mm.
Do it in respect and love, and then to receive it, how do you have to receive it as a man? Like, what do you need to do from that point? If your wife is coming to you and saying, "This needs to happen now."
You need to get off your butt and do it. I mean, obviously the tone and if you come up to me and be like, "Hey, I need friggin' help right now," right?
Mhm,
I'm gonna get off my butt and be like, okay, I'm listening to her. What I'm hearing is that she's in a heightened sense of alertness right now. She's obviously triggered. She needs help, and
mm,
then I'm gonna go right into solving, helping. And we see that even in our dynamic. A lot of times I'll be dealing with what we need to do on the foundation or up here reading my Bible, whatever, and you're yelling at me, "Hey, I need help with the kids," or
mhm,
whatever, and then I have to get up and go and see what I need to deal with.
mhm,
You know what I mean? So at that moment, I think men need to just get up, stop exactly what you're doing at that moment, and go see what your wife needs. Put her first. And that's going to do two things. Like I said, number one, you're going to show you that you value her.
mhm.
And number two, that you're there standing by her side and you got her back.
Yeah, because
Because
we're on the same team.
we're on the same team, correct?
Yeah, we're both raising a family.
Not just one sided.
Yeah, not just one person. So you can't get stuck in that, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also, too, with that being said, I think a lot of men, this going back to the nagging and stuff like that, they wouldn't have to nag if you did it, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. If a woman has resorted to nagging, uh,
They're not being heard.
they're not being heard, and, uh, they need something to change in the relationship.
Mhm.
And a lot of men kind of are avoiders of conflict because they don't know how to. I
Oh, yeah.
mean, you tell me,
Yeah.
is it because they just don't know how to fix it? And men, they they receive a problem and then they go instantly into fixing mode. But if they can't fix the problem instantly, what happens? It's just like it's frustration. What is it?
Yeah, it's a avoidant behavior. Um, you tend to detach. Okay. Like for instance, if you come to me and I don't want to get in a conflict, I'm like, whatever. You know what I mean? I don't want to hear it right now. I had a hard day at work, whatever. I don't want to deal with this right now.
Mhm,
Right. That's that avoidant behavior, which I think a lot of men do. And then you detach, right? You go into another room, you go and watch TV and you turn up the volume, or you go to your garage or whatever, you know what I mean? Because you don't want to deal with it at that moment, right? You're dealing with your own problems, right?
mhm,
And that's why I like to tell men, leave your problems at work and don't bring your problems of home to work.
mhm,
You know what I mean? I think a lot of problems right there can be solved if you learn how to detach. I know that Jocko Willink and his bunch talk a lot about detachment,
mhm,
right? And they're able to detach to be able to complete the mission.
mhm,
And I agree with it. I agree with being able to detach. The problem, though, here lies in not detaching all the time. Because when you start detaching, when it becomes easy for you to detach from your family, you're going to tend to want to do that.
mhm,
And then you have this distant dad syndrome that we talk about on the podcast like crazy,
mhm,
where you're in the room literally next to your family and you're completely separated from them.
mhm. Well, I also think a point to bring up too is like what you're saying. You don't, when I bring you a problem
Mhm.
and you kind of, it, not anymore, but in the past, if you went into an avoidant position, it's because you didn't want to deal with it right now.
Mhm.
But also, like, if you have a tendency to be an avoidant person and you don't want to deal with the issue right now, please know that if you're not helping your spouse deal with the issue, they're doing it alone
Mm.
because they don't have a choice. Somebody has to deal with the problem.
Mhm.
Somebody has to deal with that problem. And if you choose to just avoid the
Mhm.
situation, you're abandoning your spouse
Mhm.
in that situation. And then they get stuck
Mhm.
with 100% of the problem solving issue. And it can cause a lot of guilt for the person that's having to do it
Mhm.
if they, make some mistakes along the way or you feel exhausted.
Mhm.
There's a book by Adam Lane Smith. He's a guest on our podcast, and he wrote a book called Exhausted Wives, Bewildered Husbands.
And that's so true. I mean, I was just going to say that because, yeah, you absolutely burn them out. You
Mhm,
burn your spouse out,
mhm,
right? And it's crazy that you say that because the husband is bewildered. You don't know you're doing it. It's not like you meant to burn your wife out. It's not like you're trying to ride them hard and you know what I mean, just put them up like that, you know what I mean, until they break. You're not trying to do that. You have no idea. You're completely in your own world thinking that your wife's handling it all while you handle your stuff,
mhm,
you
mhm.
know? And that's a great book. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, definitely. Um,
We had a
so
past excuse me.
oh,
We had a past guest, Adria, and also Victor Robledo, who's a coach, and they all talked about burnout,
mm,
okay, and adrenal fatigue. Now, with that being said, I think there's a lot of health issues that we create when we're putting all that all this
stress.
stress and responsibilities on our spouse and not helping them. I mean,
Mhm.
it affects your health tremendously. How did it affect your health?
Oh gosh, I know for a fact that I was like way past my limit. I was
Mhm.
drowning um when I ended up getting chronically ill.
Mhm.
It left me susceptible to becoming very sick because I was so stressed all the time. Uh, Having a house and a farm and kids and living out in the country away from family and you were gone all the time, it definitely burnt me out and I was very stressed. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and if you have too much of it for prolonged periods of time, it will lower your immune system.
Mhm.
It will lower your immune system, and then it leaves you susceptible to health issues.
Mhm.
So, I mean, cortisol is a hormone that your body produces. It gets you up in the morning, things like that. Uh, but it needs to be regulated in your body.
Mhm.
So if you're in a constant state of stress, you're going to burn out, you're going to have issues, you're going to have mood swings. And ultimately, unfortunately, sometimes it ends up in chronic illness.
Yeah, something's gonna give for sure.
Hmm.
Whether it be your own health, your own mental peace, your relationship, whatever. Even with your kids, how many women are out there so stressed out that they start taking it out on their own children?
Absolutely.
That's a
Absolutely.
whole different ball game right there, too. You know what I mean?
And sometimes as moms, we're not even angry. Sometimes what happens is we're just overstimulated. I
Mm.
can tell you there's been times, I mean, I know for you, even sometimes when we're driving somewhere new and the radio's on and the kids are yelling in the car and screaming, it's like, oh my gosh, everybody be quiet so I can think. But you're not angry. What it is you're just overstimulated. And I
Mm.
know for me, sometimes I'll be in the house and the TV's blaring and Nakota has her music on and the kids are doing all kinds of stuff and I'm trying to wash dishes and cook dinner and a phone is ringing and it's just like, whoa, major overstimulation and you it kind of flips a switch in you,
Hmm.
you know?
And daddy's in the garage working out.
With your headphones on so you
Headphones
can't
on
hear
too.
anything.
Exactly.
So what are some tips that people can do, they can implement into their relationship to combat some of these little foxes that's still from their relationship, still the intimacy from their relationship, still the pleasure from their relationship? What are some tips we can give couples?
Uh, I think the number one is communication, like we always talk about, but really voicing what you want. Because for husbands, we can't read your mind,
Hmm.
you know? So I think that's a big help.
Yeah,
What do you think?
being very clear
Yeah, being
about
vocal.
what you want. I also think if you have a tendency to placate, do some inner work and start upholding boundaries. Put yourself in positions where uh, being told no and feeling uncomfortable is not so stressful to you. So start small
Hmm.
by saying, you know what, I want tacos for dinner tonight. And then just, put it out there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Yeah. So boundaries, I think boundaries is essential, not only to keep each individual happy,
Mhm.
but also to protect the marriage.
Exactly. And then number three, I think being consistent, especially if you caused a lot of hurt and you've caused distrust in your spouse. The best way I think to do is to reclaim that, right? Because trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. Is to be consistent.
Mhm.
Over time it will get better, but be consistent. Dr. Stephen Poulter talked about how here in Southern California we have this huge mountain, Mount San Antonio or Baldy, and that mountain is always constant. The weather changes. During the winter it's going to have snow on it, and the summer it's going to be dry rock, right?
Mhm.
That mountain never changes. The only thing that changes is its atmosphere around it and the weather around it. So being consistent, I think, is a big one in your marriage, and being a father.
Mhm. I definitely also think what piggybacks off of that, talking about trust, is honesty.
Mm,
It you
explain.
you definitely should be honest. And if you have experienced like a betrayal in your relationship or have a tendency to just lie about money or anything, you can actually overcome, the loss of trust with honesty. It'll balance it out. So if you start being honest consistently,
Mhm.
even though it's hard, uh, you can regain your trust with the person that you lost trust with, and you can also create a secure foundation and secure intimacy in your
Mhm.
relationship by being very honest.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I like that you said intimacy, because intimacy, the way I translate that is into me. See, so you're being completely transparent with your spouse, not hiding little things. I know a lot of people out there have separate bank accounts, and to me, that's a no-no. I mean, because you guys are joined together, you became one flesh, you guys are married together, and when you're hiding money and stashing money, you know what I mean, and she's hiding money, stashing money, or spending money here or whatever, that's a level of intimacy that's been breached, I think. What do you think?
I think if I think that separate bank accounts can easily lead to dishonesty.
Mhm.
Um, I do understand that there are dynamics in relationships where sometimes that's necessary,
Mhm.
but I think that if you're in a healthy marriage, there's not really a reason why you should have separate bank accounts.
No.
Uh, you two become one, like what you're saying,
Mhm.
and you kind of have to embrace melding your lives together.
Mhm.
It's when two people get married and they don't really want to meld their lives together. They still want to kind of have a separate life apart from their spouse, but still be together, that you can create like whitewater rapids, what Jimmy Evans says,
Mhm.
when two marriages like two rivers, that when they start flowing together, at first there's going to be whitewater rapids. But if you just continue to go with the flow, you'll learn to flow together, learn to be a force of nature together. Whereas when you see the couples that are trying to live separate lives while they're still married, that can cause a lot of whitewater rapids
Mhm.
in your life. And then you wonder why there's turbulence or why you're dealing with intimacy issues or things like that.
Absolutely. So those are some of the tips that we have for you guys and how to enrich your marriage.
I also think, oh, I have one
Oh,
more.
okay, go ahead.
I think safety.
Okay, explain.
Safety is important. So you have to have a safe environment, meaning if I come to you with an honest thing that happened to me today, like say,
Mhm.
for instance, oh, I come to you because some man talked to me gross and I was like totally disgusted about it. And I want to talk to you about it.
Mhm.
Uh, you making it a safe environment for me to come to you to be honest.
Mhm.
Or say, for instance, my boss told me something horrible and they were being totally unfair and I came to you and talked to you about it.
Mhm.
Definitely you being able to receive that, or vice versa. If, we're having a fight, it needs to be a safe fight,
Mm.
not a blaming, manipulation. I'm going to divorce you because we have a problem and, you brought this up to me type
Mhm.
of situation.
And I think the way you can create that safe space too, because I mean, obviously, there's going to be moments where you're heated, right?
Yeah.
I know that I've read where if your heartbeat goes over 100 beats per minute, a man physically cannot hear,
Hmm.
right? And that's why we start yelling and raising our voices and stuff like that. So if it gets that moment, if you guys feel that you guys are being triggered, you're feeling heated, I suggest a timeout, a 5-minute break.
Absolutely. Yes. If you see that somebody is way over their head in the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, safety also means giving each other a break.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. So that way you can resolve the problem. Because if you keep going in an argument, you're not going to resolve anything.
No, you're going to be, what do they call it, cycling, or it's when you
Marathoning.
marathoning, that's the
You're
word.
going to be marathoning.
Yeah, that's not good. That's physically exhausting.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because you're just consistently going over and over and over things, and it's just like, oh man, we're getting nowhere. It's good to fight, but to have a result to that fight, you know what I mean? To solve a problem,
Right.
because marriage isn't dissolve the fights. I mean, that's a healthy marriage doesn't have that. I mean, a healthy marriage is going to have these little fights that you can uh,
Overcome.
overcome. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just fighting and fighting and fighting and spinning your wheels, that's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It's exhausting for both people in the marriage. So you definitely want to fight with a purpose. So if you're going to have a disagreement or something like that, you want to be able to come to resolution. And both parties should be uh, willing to compromise to meet the other person in the middle.
I like that. Yeah, for sure. Compromise. Exactly. Dying to self.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That way you guys can come to some sort of solution.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
good. I like that, babe. Another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is suds, seemingly unimportant decisions.
Yes. So important. I'm telling you, people, it's not the big things that ruin marriages. The big things actually were created by the little tiny things.
Elaborate.
If you make small decisions that you think in your gut are wrong,
Hmm.
but you think, oh, it's an unimportant decision. It's not a big deal for me to friend my ex-boyfriend who I was madly in love with in high school on Facebook. We're not going to be talking. We're just friends.
Or a coworker.
Hmm. Or I think if you're doing anything that you are justifying in your head, it's
Hmm.
fine to do, but you wouldn't do it in front of your spouse. I think that's a seemingly unimportant decision.
Wow. And I think now more than ever through social media, I think that's what we're seeing. You justify it saying, "Oh, I don't it's not a big deal. We're just friends or whatever." You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I think a lot of marriages are being destroyed, ravaged by these seemingly unimportant decisions that turn big over time.
Right. Like if you know that you have an addiction to alcohol or you have issues with drinking, don't go hang out with your friends that party and drink.
Exactly. Right. Or what's the old saying? They say, don't put your hand in the fire and ask God to not let you burn. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yes. Or like also if you are married, but all your friends are not married and they're out trying to get the guy, if you're hanging out with them on a regular basis, going to clubs and stuff, that can be an issue.
Yeah, that's not okay. And I know a lot of people try to wrap that up in, oh, I'm free. Marriage isn't a prison. I should be able to go and hang out with the girls and stuff like that. That's and I know guys they say, oh, I totally trust her.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? But that's leading up to something big.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? All it takes is some freaking schmoozy guy or girl. You're in a moment of weakness where you've been drinking or partying, or say, for instance, you had an argument with your spouse
Yeah, and you're mad.
and you're mad, and then you open up to that person, and next thing you know, that person is completely making you feel like you're the only person in the world,
Mhm.
through that vanity mirror. Then what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things we highly, highly stress is watch out for those seemingly unimportant decisions,
Yeah.
especially on social media, guys. That could be totally detrimental to your marriage.
Yeah, because men are bombarded. Tell me
Mhm.
some of the things that men can do to protect themselves because they're constantly bombarded with all the stuff from of women,
Mhm.
and one thing leads to another. If you're watching pornography all the time and you think that it's not affecting your marriage, I mean, how does it does. It
It,
affects your marriage. Your wife feels like she can't ever uphold the image that you're looking at, you know what
mhm.
I mean? How can a woman be 10,000 different women?
You can't.
You can't.
You can't. And I think, for one, because men are very visually orientated. And I think marketers and social media know that. So they target us for that.
Mhm.
And I also know that algorithms, just being a social media guy you know what I mean, and dealing as an influencer and stuff like that through our podcast and our foundation, what I've noticed is the algorithms are set up to where if you pause and you look at something, then it's going to start throwing more and more of that same thing, flooding your box, literally, right?
Mhm.
Flooding you with
Your
those,
feed.
your feed with that imagery. So my suggestion, and I heard this on TikTok and I thought it was amazing, is whatever you like say for instance you're a workaholic or you like to work out and stuff like that. If you're getting bombarded on your feed with girls on there, and this is a tip for a guy I was talking to the other day, start looking at your feed like with working out or whatever it is you like. Start looking at those and start liking those, and all of a sudden you'll start getting less and less of the girl feed that's causing you to stumble and stuff like that. and you'll start getting more bombarded with the working out in your feed. That's just a tip that I've seen as
And you
well.
can also mark not interested
Not interested. There you go.
on some of those
Swipe
on
left.
the scuzzy thirst traps.
Yeah, so talk about thirst traps, because you hit me up with that the other day, and I thought that was pretty interesting. I'd never heard that before.
Thirst traps. So a thirst trap is something that a woman will post to leave a man thirsty for intimacy without, or thirsty for,
Stimulation.
sexual stimulation
Yeah.
without any type of
Connection
or finish. I don't know. What is that word?
climax.
Yeah. Without So a thirst trap.
Happy ending.
A thirst trap just leaves you thirsty. You're not satisfied. You're not satiated. And it was interesting. There was one of our guests. She posted this neat post the other day on Instagram. Her name is Gianna Simone. She's an actress. And it was this experiment that they did with butterflies where these scientists took these butterflies that were fake and they painted them really brightly colored and really made them fancy, and then put them in a room and made them move faster and different from like what a real female butterfly would move. And then they released a bunch of male butterflies into the room, and the male butterflies were enthralled with these fake butterflies.
Mm-hmm.
So then they wanted to see what would happen if they released real female butterflies into the room. And they did that. And the male butterflies wanted nothing to do with the real female version of the butterflies because they were so enthralled with the fancier version.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the times what we see on the internet actually isn't even the real thing, because you can really create deceiving images on the internet. Whereas that person in real life really does have stretch marks or, cellulite, or looks this way, or doesn't look great without makeup, but what you're seeing on social media is a fancy painted version of the butterfly rather than the real thing. And then men come home to their wives and they see the normal butterfly. But I thought it was an interesting experiment.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting, that even butterflies, which is lower on our on the hierarchy scale, I guess, of animals and human beings and stuff
Intelligence.
like that, intelligent level,
Yeah.
that they're able to be stimulated by that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
So what makes us different to think that we're not going to be stimulated in the same way?
Well, it's amazing how fast the brain reacts.
Yeah.
I did this amazing program called DNRS, Dynamic Neural Retraining Program. And it was a program that helped me retrain my mind so that way I can overcome a lot of the issues that I had from chronic illness. And they do this little example of how fast your brain reacts to stimulation, and just through our imagination. And I don't know, I'm sure some people have heard of this little experiment, but basically you pretend like you're holding a lemon in your hand, and you close your eyes and you hold the lemon and you feel the texture of the skin in your hand, and you visualize its color, visualize how it feels, you visualize the size of it and everything. And then you imagine that it's getting sliced open, and you can see the juiciness of the lemon kind of starting to explode out of the lemon as you're cutting through it. And in those moments, as you're visualizing that, your mouth will begin to salivate because your brain is starting to prepare for the idea of eating this lemon. And that is how fast your brain will react to stimulation.
Wow.
Within seconds of just imagining that you're going to eat a lemon. So imagine if we're,
So
always watching thirst traps.
yeah, exactly. So you're watching these thirst traps, which are definitely robbing you of your intimacy in your marriage, right? So if you were to implement, let me ask you this. So if I was to utilize that and just thinking about you all day, right? Just
Mhm.
thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking like that, that should then, by right, stimulate me to be able to want to engage. Because I know a lot of men like that I've talked to, they say, man, I'm just not in love with my wife anymore. Or man, she just doesn't do it for me anymore.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And the first question I ask them is, what are you watching?
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? So that's a big that's a little tip there for men and women both. You know, if you're finding
Absolutely.
yourself not being able to be interested in your spouse that way sexually, um, try doing that tip that she just talked about.
Or even if you like for women, if you're like bugged with your husband and you're constantly thinking and replaying all the bad things that they're doing,
Mhm,
uh, you can retrain your brain to
mhm,
think on the positive. So, like my husband said, if he's thinking about me all day, it matters what he's thinking.
mhm,
He needs to be thinking good thoughts, not not negative thoughts. But I mean, if you choose to think about the good things that your spouse is doing rather than the bad things, and you choose to think on those things regularly,
mhm,
it will create a different type of hunger, a different type of intimacy, a different type of life before you. The Bible says that we need to be renewing our mind,
mhm.
and he's literally given us that power within our own thinking, and we have control of that.
No, definitely we can transform our whole world by what we think on, because what a man thinks on, so shall it be, right?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
So guys, if you're listening to this, man, and you're thinking your wife's the worst person in the world, well, guess what? That's what you're gonna have.
Mhm.
And wives, I had this one time told to me, when me and my wife are going through marriage counseling. The lady who was giving it to us, she actually said, she's like, "Oh, speak to the man you want your husband to be." So if you're gonna speak to him like, for lack of better words, a jerk or an asshole, guess what? That's possibly what you're gonna get. If you speak to him like a king, as a prince, someone who has value in your life, that's how he's gonna respond as well.
Mhm. And might not be the first time you
Mhm.
speak to them nice. Don't lose heart. Consistency, consistency. Just
Mhm.
continue to choose to speak to your spouse with regard and respect and love that they deserve, you
Mhm.
know, and just stay consistent in that. It's got to end somewhere, and
Mhm.
somebody has to choose to create better behavior and create a better atmosphere
Mm.
at some point if you're dealing with issues in your marriage.
No, I agree with you 100%. I do. Well, thank you guys for coming on. If you guys have any more questions for Jenny and I, we have the Show Up Dad coaching and mentorship. Remember, guys, it's not therapy. It's solution driven training. And it's such, we won't waste any time trying to dig in up in your past and stuff like that. We do have people for that we can kind of like send you to. We will focus on the present and future in a solution driven way and work to find effective solutions to change your life right now. If you're ready to get started, we'll have a link in the bio. And thank you guys once again. I hope this is helping you. What do you think, Jenny?
Thank you. We're praying for all you families and
Absolutely.
marriages.
Marriage can be successful if done right.